So we just finished shooting the show all about inflation, which is top of mind for almost everybody because for the last 4 or so years, we've been going through a high inflationary period, something we haven't seen since the late 70s or even 80s. And when you go to the grocery store, when you go to the gas station, when you go practically everywhere, when's the last time you went to a movie? All of these things cost us way more than what they did even 5, 6 short years ago. Now, when you're working, when you're in the working years, it's tough enough, but it's not anything like when you're 5, 6, 7 years into retirement and you don't have the earned income. Now you have to produce your income from Social Security. Maybe you have a pension if you're lucky enough, and then everything else is on you based on the investments that you've been able to save up until that point. So the strategies that you would incorporate when you're retired are going to be significantly different and more important than the strategies that you incorporate in the working years. However, because inflation is not as obvious always as what it has been over the last 4 to 5 years, topping out at the summer of 22 at in excess of 9%, it's not always that obvious. And that's why we call inflation sneaky, because it's kind of like walking on a treadmill, but the treadmill is slowly increasing in speed. You don't really notice it until all of a sudden you start falling off the treadmill. Inflation, it works a lot like that most of the time. In retirement, if your Social Security is increasing on average about 2.5%, but on average, inflation is increasing over 3% over the course of 15, 20 years, you're going to find your lifestyle, your investment income is not going to be able to keep up with it if you don't incorporate some very specific plans. So in the show, we talked about a couple different ways you can combat inflation. We talked about increasing your portfolio construction intentionally designing your portfolio to weather the storm of inflation. We talked about implementing some tax mitigation strategies, decreasing your retirement tax bill by a significant margin, which adds to the amount of money that you can incorporate within your spendable lifestyle, increasing the ability to combat inflation. Another strategy that we didn't quite get to in the show is building an income plan. Building an income plan to produce the income that you need at any point throughout the course of your retirement, but also to make sure that you have income that can beat taxation, it can beat inflation, and then you can also have excess income for some of the discretionary things that you want to do, or for some of the things that are going to happen to you maybe, like healthcare expenses, long-term care, so you have enough income for the latter years of your retirement to account for some of those maybe unforeseeable things. The income plan is really important, and it really needs to be intentional and purposeful. The way we go about constructing income plans for retirees is we have different buckets of money, and those different buckets of money are invested very differently based on the purpose around those investments. So as an example, you're 62 years old, you're retired, you need income, maybe you take your Social Security, but you need excess income to produce the lifestyle that you want. So your income then comes from that income bucket. That's why it's called an income bucket. It's producing you immediate income. And then you have another bucket that is invested a little bit differently than the safe bucket of the income bucket. That's going to grow at a little bit higher rate. And as your income bucket depletes, because you're taking money out of it to live, it is going to fill up that income bucket. And then we have a third bucket of money that's invested a little bit more aggressively with a higher target return. That's going to fill up the other bucket, which is going to fill up eventually the income bucket. And then we have what we call a forever bucket. And this bucket is invested much differently. It's for a much longer term time frame, which means you can afford, if you want to take even more risk in that bucket for a much higher target growth. And all of those different buckets working together can produce a long-lasting income stream that will provide enough income now for your retirement, enough income 10 years in retirement, and enough income 20, 25 years down the road for the lifestyle and the unforeseen costs, potentially like long-term care or healthcare costs. So that is also a strategy that you can incorporate that can effectively combat inflation. Now, all of that is incumbent upon you creating a retirement plan to aggregate all of these different strategies and information together in a format that you can actually implement and take action steps. When we create our written retirement plan as it relates to inflation, we use an assumed rate of return most of the time. It can vary based on situation and where we're at and where the family or individual that we serve is at, but typically we'll use a 2% rate. Now, in environments like this, where inflation's 4 or 5, or a couple years ago was 8, 9%, that might seem a little bit off. But we do know long-term, and that's what your retirement plan is for, long-term, we have to account, if we're assuming an 8% inflation long-term, that's just, it's not going to give us information that we can take action on. And what we do is we true that number up each and every year. So let's say you need $6,000 a month when you retire. Based on our plan of a 2% inflation, the next year in retirement, it would project that you need about $6,200 a month. Well, we get together that next year and we do an assessment. How much is it really costing you to live? Is it $6,000 a month still? Because sometimes that does happen. In inflationary environments from really say 2009 to 2020, when inflation was almost zero, it was not uncommon for us to get together with a family where we projected they were going to need $6,200. In fact, they needed $6,000, or sometimes they needed even less. So that does happen. So whatever it is, if you need $6,000, we'll keep that coming. If you need $6,100, $6,200, or sometimes that happens, families need $6,500 when we were projecting $6,200. But either way, it needs to be trued up each and every year, and that's how we can make sure that inflation is accurately accounted for at that particular point in time, but also that adjustment takes place for the remaining 20 to 25 years as well. So that's how we account for inflation within our overall plan, not only by representing it with an assumed rate, but also by incorporating strategies like the income strategies, the tax planning strategies, the Social Security optimization strategies to produce more income, the investment, the retirement type of portfolio where we can eliminate the big drops or minimize the big drops in the market and the impact that that has on the portfolio. All of those strategies are baked into that retirement plan as well. Because the last thing you want to do is you don't want to be surprised. It wasn't that long ago, somebody came in to talk with us for the very first time, and he was really confident. He was an engineer, and he brought this spreadsheet. We see a lot of spreadsheets. It's a lot of fun to go through. He constructed this spreadsheet, and he said, Loren, he said, I feel really confident about my retirement plan. I said, fantastic. Let's go through it. Let's see what you have. And his stated goal was that he just wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to run out of money before his early 90s, his age early 90s. And his plan, based on his spreadsheet, did exactly that. So we talked about a number of different strategies. We decided we wanted to get back together again. We built a plan for him. And our initial plan actually had him running out of money in his late 70s. Now, that was a huge surprise to this gentleman. And he was a little bit shaken about it. So we talked about the differences between the plan that he put together and the plan we put together. And the primary difference is he forgot to account for inflation. We accounted for inflation. He forgot to account for inflation. We then worked on his plan and all of those different components, trying to make the income plan a little bit more purposeful and a little bit more efficient, making the portfolio more efficient, really decreasing the overall retirement tax bill. And then we were able to extend that plan out so he was confident he was going to have money not only in his 90s, but all the way up to age 100. Now, the initial shock was frightening to him, but I can tell you he was extremely grateful to catch that mistake early on because he still had a ton of time to correct that mistake. If he wouldn't have caught that mistake, he would have retired, gone through retirement 5, 6, 7 years, and then the impact of the increased cost of living would have really caught up with him. He would have noticed it. And then it could have been a little bit too late. So he's extremely grateful and glad he caught that mistake. Inflation is missed all the time because, again, it is very sneaky. So account for inflation within your overall plan. Not only account for it, but then also have specific strategies you can incorporate to beat it. Check out the show. You'll get more information on those strategies. If you want to take advantage of the Retire Ready Call, it's very simple. Go to retirereadycall.com. You can have a conversation directly with the retirement planner to talk about your inflation concerns, the strategies you can incorporate to beat inflation, and much, much more. Look forward to seeing you on the call.